Hey folks, how's it going? Welcome to week 5 of this technical writing course. We are making a transition now. We are going to begin working on a new assignment and we're going to move away from the resume and cover letter assignment where we were asked to really sell ourselves and consider how we are able to convince someone to employ us, to convince someone that we're the best fit for a position, to really write persuasively about ourselves. Now the new assignment, the technical definition, technical review process is going to ask us to do something similar but for a product or a file or a thing, a piece of technology, something that we see every day. And the process will be very similar. We're trying to basically sell that definition, that description to our audience and getting them to understand the benefits of this object, of this thing in the world, and maybe its flaws or the best ways to use it, the most effective ways to make it do its best work or be its best self. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about how we're going to do this. So essentially, this assignment boils down to a critical assessment, a critical evaluation of an object of your choosing, right? So I've given you an example of the headphones to consider how someone is really taking seriously and looking carefully at the technical specifications and characteristics of these headphones and figuring out how to convincingly convey its qualities, both good and bad, to a wide range of audience. So you're going to be asked to create a critical assessment, a critical evaluation of an object and define it as such and by its own characteristics, whether they be good or bad. So one of the big sort of hurdles or obstacles you'll have to deal with when you're beginning this definition assignment is dealing with jargon. So I suspect that for many of you, jargon is a sort of familiar term, but in this aspect, when we think about jargon, we're thinking about forms of communication, forms of writing, forms of dialogue that are sort of specialized to a certain group of individuals, and individuals who are sort of in the know, and people who understand what's going on, and who are a specific kind of audience who may already know the language, the keywords, the phraseology of a specific kind of discourse. So we are all already in these kinds of discourse communities, whether it's in our major, whether it's in our hobbies, or it's in our friendships. We're already taking advantage of different kinds of jargon. We're speaking to each other in specific ways. We're sharing information in very specific and tailored ways. And dealing with this when it comes to conveying the qualities or characteristics of an object or a product in the world can be tricky because you're going to have to deal with jargon, frankly. So part of the work for this week, week 5, will be asking you to think about and develop strategies for dealing with jargon. So the sort of downside, so let's just say this, jargon is not always a bad thing. Very often, as I said, we are sort of taking advantage of our discourse communities, of the people that we are already familiar with, the kinds of language and ways of speaking that we're already familiar with. And that's not to say that these are bad ways of going about communicating, but that there is a need to know and be resourceful for when you are using jargon and when you must avoid using jargon. So we will be thinking about that throughout the week, and just a sort of a way of thinking about jargon as a negative sort of quality is to think about how your audience may approach this technical definition that you've written, this technical description that you've written, and if you're using specific jargon that is not necessarily accessible by everyone, that they can be a very alienating process for your audience, and they can come to this description or definition and say to themselves, "This is not for me. I don't fit in this conversation." And really, that's what you want to try to avoid when you're writing these technical definitions and descriptions and reviews. You are writing a critical assessment of something that should be accessible to or by a wide range of possible audience members. So as you're thinking about jargon, I want you to think about your own experiences with jargon, having felt alienated or having felt sort of separate from a conversation that's going on or a use of language that doesn't necessarily make sense to you or is clear to you, and think about strategies for dealing with that. So this is sort of part of the work for this week is figuring out how to negotiate technical language. Basically, you're going to be choosing an object or a thing in the world and figuring out how to talk about that in a way, describe that in a way that makes it accessible to a number of people who may um, come to this object in the world. So, uh, with that in mind, we're going to do a kind of writing that's different than what we've been doing so far. So, we've been doing a kind of short staccato style of bullet point writing, or in the case of the cover letter, some very short sentences on a very short page. And this assignment is going to ask you to really take seriously more formulaic, structural styles of writing paragraphs, of course, in a much longer form. So, as you are dealing with this assignment, keep that in mind that you are writing something very different than what you've written so far with the resumes and cover letters. You're writing a paper that is more like a sort of formal paper, right? And finding examples of this in the world is perhaps more challenging than we may be aware of. Certainly, you can find critical reviews on Amazon or something where someone is just bashing a specific printer or something. But finding a very specific and well written characterization of a product is not always easy. And so, really do lean on the examples that I have provided in the week 5 folder because it will be beneficial to you. And I don't mean that you must use them as a template or a sort of formal cue, but that they will be useful to you to understand what exactly I'm looking for in this assignment, both formally and in terms of content. So that is what the definition and review assignment is about, sort of at its core, is figuring out how to deal with this kind of language and to write a description or a definition that is accessible and is also convincing. And so let's talk a little bit about, or I'll talk a little bit here about how to do that, how to convince your audience that what you are talking about is the cold hard facts of it or the truth of the matter. And so it really boils down to having evidence that can support your ideas and your opinions and perspectives on this. And so I see evidence as being broken down into 3 basic categories, the first of which is your own experience, of course. And so if you have experience using a product, whether it's a specific kind of vehicle or a specific gaming system or a specific kind of style of buck knife, if you have experience with this product and you feel that you are comfortable describing its characteristics, both positive and negative, then that's a great way to start, of course, to sort of lean on your own perspective, your own experience, and use that as momentum to begin this assignment and to sort of get it off the ground. But of course, as we are sort of all aware, just having someone's opinion is not necessarily the most convincing or compelling take on really anything, especially a review or assessment of a product. Certainly we all sort of look to reviews of products when we go to purchase something or use something, but very often we must try to sort through the garbage that can be the reviews on Amazon or whatever. There are always sort of unsatisfied folks out there who are not providing the most objective, straightforward assessment of their experience, right? So in that case, you really want to lean on the physical characteristics, qualities of the object you're reviewing and defining. This is number 2 in terms of evidences, right? So be able to describe effectively, clearly, and convincingly the aspects of the product you have chosen, right? You want to be able to speak to its durability, if it has durability, or if it lacks durability. You want to be able to speak to its quality over time, right? Its user friendliness. You want to be able to speak to what it was like using it, why that was positive or why that was negative. If you want to talk about the best possible cell phone on the market, be able to sort of speak to the physical and specific characteristics of that phone. This is an example, and use those to sort of sell the phone itself. And finally, you can use a form of evidence that asks you to compare objects, right? Of course, so just to sort of lean on the cell phone example again, if you are comparing cell phones, and there really is an opportunity to think about what's better, what works, why is one better than the other one. And so often, with this example, it boils down to user friendliness. Is this object user friendly? Does it sort of provide an experience that is not only positive but useful, right? So these are the 3 forms of evidence that I will encourage you to sort of take advantage of and lean on as you are writing this definition and review. because they will help guide you not only in terms of the content, but they will also help guide you in terms of the form of this piece of writing. Like I said, this is a more formal paragraph style writing, so as you are thinking about the characteristics and qualities of your object, be thinking about how you can separate those using paragraphs, right? So, for example, if you talked about the durability of your iPad or your television, that you would sort of spend some time talking about that specifically. You would linger on that actual detail for some time, a paragraph's length, maybe. Um, so, of course, you want this to be a useful guide to whomever may be reading it. So, this is sort of what you need to be asking yourself as you're beginning to come to a close in this assignment is it useful? Does it provide a useful, effective, and compelling representation of this product or experience, right? And if so, how? Of course, you always want to be asking not only why, but how. And the how is sort of your way into figuring out what you've done right, or in some cases, what you need to do to improve your piece of writing. I hope you will lean on the examples and information in our folder this week, and of course, lean on me if you are finding that you're struggling with this assignment, because it is a shift from the resume and cover letter, but it's also a piece of writing that sort of lends itself to a bit of freedom. Of course, you're going to spend some time working on objects and things in your sort of orbit, and dealing with language that you're accustomed to, and figuring out strategies to sort of circumnavigate the jargon of any specific style of writing or form of writing. So, of course, as I said, lean on what you have and lean on me. I look forward to reading these documents. I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.